So, hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Welcome to Honey and Coffee podcast. Today, I have Pearl, who is joining me as a co-host for today's episode in the podcast. We're going to be talking specifically about a very interesting subject related to Pearl and her recent success. So, Pearl, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Kasey. Hello, everyone. My name is Pearlyn Mirabella, also known and probably more known as Pearl. I was a co-host for a couple of podcast episodes for Honey and Coffee. You may have recognized me as a previous My Anime List X Honeyfeed contest winner, as well as a contracted author on the Hive Mind. Thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, that latter part that you mentioned is definitely one of the reasons why we really wanted to have you here in the podcast to really discuss how thrilling it is for you, first of all, and honestly, how other people can kind of try to get to that position, try to get win the contests, try to get their novel selected, and also finally, like how to really stand out across the crowd of saturated writers and readers out there. So with that being said, I wanted to kind of jump into part one, which is essentially just high-level ideas or concepts of how you could actually get your writing and your novel, so to speak, stand out. Because I feel like there's a lot of beginners out there, there's a lot of mature writers out there, there's a lot of intermediate, but at the end of the day, you don't necessarily have to write spectacularly insane to the point where you're kind of deviating away from your own process and your own style. And I feel like each person's very different in how you can write. And I wanted to basically ask you, Pearl, I guess, what would you think would be the best way for people, writers and readers alike, to kind of stand out with their first novel, especially for writing contests like these when there's hundreds of submissions?
Yeah, especially since more and more writers are discovering platforms like Honeyfeed, there has been an abundance of stories, and sometimes it can be overwhelming for both the writers and the readers. There's so many tropes and ideas that have been written beyond oblivion. It's understandable why writers can struggle with making their own stories unique. And, so a while back, a fellow writer from Instagram sent me an email asking me for advice on how to make their story stand out. They told me they wrote the first chapter of their story and they felt lost as to how to proceed. So, I thought back to my own novels and how I felt when I was writing for several of Honeyfeed's competitions. And this is just my opinion. Every writer is going to have their own opinion on how to approach their first novel. But the best way to hook a reader is making a caption for a reel on Instagram that would quote unquote stop the scroll. You want the reader to stay interested in your work, so the first few sentences or chapter or prologue should captivate the reader enough for them to click on the next page. You want readers to care about your character's journey, or at least give them a reason on why they should care, because there's hundreds of characters out there. What makes your character stand out? Is your character relatable? Is the character's feelings and responses and behaviors interesting enough for the readers to develop the connection? So all of these things matter, and I think it should be considered as early as the first chapter if possible. Now, of course, this rule doesn't apply to all types of stories, but for a beginner writer, I do think it is a good way to learn. And basically, you would try to be in your character's shoes. That way, even if you're writing a common genre, readers will care enough to continue reading. So I understand that all readers are different, and some would rather have a good story than, good characters. But for me, I actually think I feel like I'm more interested in a story when the characters are interesting. A story can be basic and mediocre, but if the characters are unique, relatable, funny, and I care about them, I will care about their stories, as the story is going to be unique to them and them only.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, I think one of the biggest things that honestly people probably should hone in more on is just general character development, right? Across the entire narrative. It doesn't necessarily have to make the character very likable per se, but you want to just see that as a reader.
Mm-hmm. And a character doesn't have to be the constant good guy or a hero or the clumsy main character. It's just a character that's worthy to be cared about. If you write a really good villain as the main character, people want to know that character's story. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And that actually kind of brings it on to the second part I really wanted to talk about, which was kind of even if you kind of establish a good character development, you're able to kind of get like some of the very common techniques in writing really established for your novel. Sometimes people would, especially when you're reading a lot of manga, watching a lot of anime, you kind of grow adherent to some very commonly used tropes that you typically see in anime. These are typically things like school rom-coms, fantasy isekais, or even more, if you dig a little bit deeper, actual writing common tropes, such as narrative tropes like the amnesiac MC, the love triangles in a rom-com, the save the world type of theme. And I kind of wanted to ask you, I guess, or get your opinion on this, is whether or not you feel like some of these tropes are really commonly, way too overused to the point where like it's beyond saving if someone tries to do it in the first place, or there has to be a very, very unique twist.
I don't believe any common tropes should be avoided just because it's a common trope. I really do think it's just the execution. So ironically, isekai is one of my least favorite genres because, like you said, it's been oversaturated, and I've noticed that many writers, including beginning writers in the community, going for this genre. And I include myself because back when I was younger, and you could even say my winning novel, Realm Assassin, falls under isekai. And I think the reason why so many people go for isekai, it's because isekai is the equivalent of writing anything and everything. It's often a character or characters being transported into a new world where there are new rules, new physics, new layouts, etc. And I think a lot of beginners opt for isekai because it's like a cop-out in writing realism. So for example, if someone isn't knowledgeable on the laws of physics or reality in general, they can just transfer their main character to a fantasy world where such laws of physics won't apply. Or if you're writing a magic story, then you can literally just have tons of cop-outs. You can just explain everything with magic, And I think people also love writing isekais because, in my opinion, it is a way to escape reality, right? Because think of how boring reality gets. People have an endless cycle of attending school and work, and sometimes writing yourself or your characters heading to another world would make, writers feel like main characters. It also gives writers a sense of importance, especially when the tropes are, being the chosen one or saving the world.
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest with you, like escapism is so real these days with so many innovation and technologies out there that are making people really consume a lot of content and sometimes just absolutely distort themselves from reality. And I feel like in a writing perspective, that makes a lot of sense in terms of like relatableness. People are just reading and they're sticking to these common tropes that are evenly, even if you commonly used. From a writing perspective as well, I feel like even, as someone, I'm a more of a beginner writer, and I've tried to kind of just use some similar tropes that I've already mentioned, like the amnesiac MC, love triangles here and there. I always try to throw like a small twist to these things because I know for a fact that everyone's gonna introduce some sort of like common trope or theme because it gives a bit of like a framework and a guideline to write off of sometimes. Like, okay, introduce this makes my light novel, web novel, a little bit more relatively realistic or more relatable. And I feel like you just have to have a combination of obviously some good writing experience to make that twist really, really good, but also like make it slightly different and just not make it like very, very, I don't know, for lack of a better word, just like stereotypical, right? Like, typicalness is kind of sometimes what just pushes me away. It's like, oh, I've seen this 100 times or I've read this 100 times. Let me move over to a cooler novel.
Yeah, it's literally the same story, but just with different characters. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that such stories can be written well. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with using common tropes, but, writers can definitely spice things up by, like you said, combining multiple ideas and or concepts they enjoy through other media and see if their stories can apply them. So going back to the user who emailed me, I informed them that, they can start with a common trope, actually, because in my opinion, if you try too hard to be unique, I actually think it only backfires because then it becomes convoluted and you would only confuse yourself. And in my opinion, I don't think there's anything that's truly 100% absolutely unique nowadays. I think a person's work can stand out if it's executed properly and tastefully. So, for example, let's say you wrote an enemies to lovers story, right? It's overused, it's done plenty of times in many books and movies, but maybe you can make it more exciting by having parallels or opposing forces. So like having one main character saving people with magic and another saving people with science. So you can take two tropes that hypothetically go against each other, such as magic versus science, and then add that spice of slow burn romance, you know? I know there's going to be plenty of people who are into that type of story, and I think it will definitely keep readers around as long as you continue to satiate their curiosity on how such differences get resolved.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, I'm gonna admit myself, I'm kind of like a diehard with that type of stuff. Sometimes I'm honest with you. Like, enemies to lovers tropes, the slow burn romance, like there are definitely readers out there. And
yes, yes,
you're gonna get some fans. Obviously, there's a lot going around, so there might be more supply than demand ultimately, but. I think it's also a combination of you have to enjoy what you're writing as well. Like if you really love that theme and you love that common trope that's been kind of spreaded around before, who cares? Go ahead and write it. If you feel like you can put a really solid twist to it and execute it well, like you said, I feel like, you know, and maybe this is just an excuse for me because that's kind of the energy I drive off of to even start. Honestly, that's kind of like how I see it.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, and I wanted to actually kind of ask one more small thing while we're actually on this topic is, I guess like for these specific common tropes, right? Like, do you feel like specifically there are ways that people can try to just come up with their own tropes or come up with their own ideas while twisting these other common tropes together? Like, I feel like sometimes people are just, they're kind of sticking into a specific common trope, but they're not necessarily combining them like you're kind of mentioning. They're kind of siloing these together into a specific chapter or an entire story is just based off of that. And that's kind of why I just see that as kind of boring sometimes. I feel like, ironically, conflicting to what I've mentioned before, despite it being really cool, there has to be a very, very sophisticated way you go about executing all of it, right? And like it's always like I feel like it's a big challenge to get to that stage. You have that idea of like you want to write this trope like this, for example, this let's say for example the male female MC, they have a love interest and all of a sudden they're at school and all of a sudden one of them are sick, and then you have the other partner, like, you know, the love interest visiting them while they're at sick and skipping class. That typical web novel / anime trope you've seen so many thousands of times, right? Probably like basically, I don't know, like I want to include that trope, but I also want to make sure that that's like we put it like a unique twist to it, you know what I mean?
No, I agree. I think the issue with a lot of beginner writers, and don't get me wrong, sometimes I struggle with this myself too, is that if they're not falling into the trap of writing a common trope, a lot of writers fall for the trap of writing several common tropes. Now, we mentioned about trope combination earlier. There's nothing wrong with that, and I usually encourage writers to do trope combinations, but when you combine two common tropes, like let's say isekai, trope number one is the chosen one, trope number two is saving the world. That may be two tropes, but it's still, you know, they're both still really common, and they're both in almost every isekai, you know, so it's still not, in my opinion, unique enough to make your story stand out. So I'm gonna out myself here because this has been like a story that I've been sort of thinking of in the past few years, and I realized I haven't really encountered any form of at least popular media that has this type of story out there. So you know stories like My Hero Academia or Little Witch Academia. It's your common main character has this superpower or has this one unique thing about himself or herself, and they go to this like school, right, to enhance their powers, and they meet all of these people, right? So then I'm thinking, how can I make a story like this but stand out? What is it that other people haven't done yet? So then I'm thinking, oh, you know what I haven't seen yet? What about I write a story about urban legends? So you know horror urban legends, right? Like Kachisaku-sama, Kuchisaka Onna, all of these Japanese urban legends, or even American urban legends. What if there's a story out there where future generations of these urban legends want to become like the next scare? So then they attend the school to learn how to be monsters, like, and then they go back to the human world and try to like scare the humans, but then they fail miserably. So then there's like another layer of comedy on top of the horror and school genre. So again, right, some people might still call this cliche. It's probably already done out there somewhere, and I just don't know. But it still combines multiple genres instead of one genre, if that makes sense.
Gosh, like the moment you mentioned, like that whole idea of like you're the main character having this mysterious power, just being very overpowered, or not necessarily powered at all, but have a very unique trait, and then entering like the school and having like all these competitors and rivals and all that stuff. First thing I thought was like, wow, there's actually so many different mangas and animes that actually have that. Like right off the top of my head, who kind of has that. Like each anime is gonna have like a small twist, or each story is gonna have like a twist to it, like you kind of mentioned, which kind of makes it special in its own way and still makes it really readable. Like Jujutsu, Shokugeki, Food Wars, like they all have that kind of idea. But anyways, I think what I'm trying to say is, like, broadly speaking wise, again, put your own twist to it, make your story very convoluted and sophisticated, like Pearlyn saying. And honestly, I think once you're able to execute that perfectly end to end, your story will flow and you'll definitely get right into it. And yeah, I mean, we're kind of out of time, actually. We've been kind of going on forever about this, and we want to honestly talk about this forever, but let's catch the next episode to really kind of continue on this topic. But we're gonna have to end this today for now. So yeah, don't forget to like and comment, subscribe onto the Honey's Anime YouTube channel as we continue releasing these new Honey and Coffee podcast episodes. And until then, we bid farewell. Thank you for listening and tuning in.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.